The topic is the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and public education in the South. And we're talking to the professor of sociology at Tennessee State University, Dr. KSanford. And of course, Dr. Sanford, let us continue our discussion from the last segment by giving you an opportunity to talk about the right of 1866, the Civil Rights Act of 1866, as well as that of 1964, and make some kind of comparisons as you so desire.
Okay, and thanks so much again. In 1866, you had the Civil Rights Act at that particular time period with the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment to the Constitution that you would have thought would have given certain levels of civil rights, civil liberties to people of African descent as indeed being citizens of the United States. However, as you may imagine, a lot of resistance came about as a result of that. And so during this Reconstruction period, there was really almost an enactment of re-enslavement. And people really rose to try to prevent those types of civil liberties and that one act actually represented. So to carry you forth from that time period of 1870 after Reconstruction, we continued and everything was very much the same with Jim Crow laws, with very strong segregation types of incidents. And of course, 1896 Plessy versus Ferguson, our Supreme Court placed a frame that said everything had to be separate and of course unequal. Although of course it was Plessy versus Ferguson, separate and everything equal, we know indeed that it was unequal. Absolutely. And that was the law of the land. So when we look back on it, we can see how egregious of an act that was based on our Supreme Court and the citizens throughout the United States to then still keep people who have been here for hundreds of years in subservient types of conditions.
You know, Dr. Sanford, say something about Jim Crow, because about the differences in the accommodations and et cetera under that system. Jim Crow was a very egregious type of an act. What they had was things that were so-called separate, but they were indeed unequal. Many people might have images of we're talking about the school systems in the South. My mother, if I may just bring her up as a case study, during this particular time period taught in a two-room schoolhouse. She taught the grades the 1st through the 7th from Oxford, North Carolina, and Mrs. Benjamin Chavis' mother, Mrs. Benjamin Chavis, taught the 8th grade through the 12th grade. Now, other public schools had just a regular class and regular school system, as you may know of today, but these one-room little schools were not up to par. They were not equipped with the same type of educational opportunities as they were for everyone else. But it was the same way for every other accommodation that you could have possibly thought about that should have been open for everyone in the society to live in. And this is the type of a Jim Crow law that you had. It made everything certainly totally unequal, and it was very egregious on the part of our government, state, national, and even local governments that caused it and inflicted that upon a people. But we are here today to talk about education and that whole educational process, which is, of course, very important from a sociological point of view, to try to help people to move from one place in their socioeconomic status to another location in life. So when you think about hundreds of years of preventing that, then if you think about even today, we would still have many people who are first generation entering into institutions of higher learning. Why? Because it was based on what had happened a long time ago. And that's very important. That's very important because as we move through that time period of Jim Crow laws and leading from the Plessy versus Ferguson, of course, we've talked about the infamous 1954 Brown versus Board of Education. And coming out of that time period, incidentally, I was born years after that, and where I went to school, it was still segregated. To give you some idea how, because the letter of the law was written, that didn't necessarily mean that it was going to be implemented. And so after that period, there was an uprise of people of consciousness of kind, and everyone, of course, knows the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Tried to get equal access for people, just fairness. In many instances, we would define Dr. King as an assimilationist. He really wanted everything just to have equal access, to actually have
just accommodations that were indeed equal. And so we worked very hard for that. And I think this particular act of 1964 certainly represents that whole movement to try to bring about what the Constitution of the United States and the Declaration of Independence stated by the founding fathers of America. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This whole issue of justice within the educational system.
And of course, we're still fighting that issue in a real sense, are we not, Dr. Sanford?
Absolutely. We are still today, unfortunately, in 2004, 40 years later, we still have disparities when it comes to education. We still have disparities when it comes to certain types of equal opportunities within the society in which we live in. Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois in 1903 did a classic piece entitled The Souls of Black Folks. And in that piece, he talked about the demarcations that went on during the time period that we have just laid out and how it would be then, of course, impact the 20th century. When he said the problem of the 20th century would be that of the problem of the color line. And here we are in the 21st century, and it's the same problem.
100 years later.
100 years later. And indeed, when we look at the latest research, when you think in terms of Brown versus Board and desegregation policies, schools have now started to become resegregated. And we see this throughout the United States and even here in the state of Tennessee and as well as in other states. If you start looking at it with a, I guess in a narrow way of understanding this particular issue and how it's impacting people. So we have to be very careful of that. And there are many other scholars like Dr. Hannibal Shabazz, Dr. Francis Cress-Welsing, myself and other social scientists are very kind of interested in looking at how some of these issues are still very pervasive today with people who are the so-called power elite are superimposing their values in a negative way toward others who have not had certain types of equal opportunities. So we still have to understand that we do not have a certain level of equality today and that we still have to fight for it.
And we ought to continue to celebrate this act of 1964 because it gave us at least a start in terms of trying to deal with some of the issues that we have now. Would that be a good assessment as we make preparations for this last, this second commercial break?
Yeah, absolutely. We certainly need that. And when you think in terms of Thurgood Marshall and as he fought so hard, he looked at the letter of the law and tried to bring about constitutional rights forward. So this is why this is so important for us to celebrate, because it did give certain types of opportunities. And Dr. King fought for that and died for that, as well as many other people out there who fought for it. So yes, it is certainly worthy of celebration, but we still have a lot of work to do.
Dr. Sanford, what I'd like to do as we make preparations for this second commercial break during this last segment is to have you to, in a real sense, address our young people. That is to talk in terms of dealing with them, in terms of their responsibility and what they ought to do in order to make the Civil Rights Act of 1964 a reality.
Absolutely.
And we'll be back with our... The topic is the Civil Rights